With that, let's get to our first big topic, and we'll see how things go in terms of the second one. But this is one that Rob brought up to me just before we started, and that is the challenge of dealing with a blank slate when it comes to game design. So, Rob, since you brought this up, I'll let you kind of introduce us for the topic.
Yeah, so this last week I got the bug to kind of make a couple of the game or make one of the games that I've been kind of stewing about for years now. Just on the side, I don't have much time, but I figured why not hammer at it a little bit. But I always get caught. This is something that happens to me. I know it happens to a lot of other people. But you get that I don't know if it's fear or whatever it is of this blank slate. You have this big idea that you want to make, and I only have a limited set of programming skills, but I know what my limitations are, and I know how to go about punching through them, like with various tools I have at my disposal. For example, I want to make a simulation type game, like a sports sim game, or something along those lines, and Excel is kind of my go-to for hammering out details there, and I'm pretty good and adept at that. But what happens is I get caught up in my own feature set, which is to say I have a beginning, I know what I want to do, and I have an end goal that's constantly changing and growing. And getting from that point A to point B is this monumental path that I don't know how to go down. And oddly enough, I've been working in this industry for 17 years now. See, yeah, 17, possibly going on 18. I have to go back and do the math on that, but you'd think I'd know something about that, especially being in production, about the how the flow is supposed to work from beginning to end. And I was telling Josh that's kind of why I probably always go back to working for a larger company. I've done that off and on for over a decade now, and it's just the structure of working in a larger company where you know what the goals are, you know how to get there, you have tools at your disposal, and you can leverage a lot of the to-dos and the hows on them. But when it's on your own and it's only you, and you don't really have much in the way of assets or skills you can leverage, it becomes a giant task. It becomes, at first, you're like, okay, well, I have this giant goal, but I have this limited set of abilities. How do I approach that? What is the way to go? And I know a lot of people struggle with that, and I'm just kind of like, how do people go through that and deal with it, and what is the best way of punching through? And half of me is asking that, and half of me already knows what a lot of the answers are. So Josh, I'll head it over to you, because this doesn't just exist in making a game. It exists on your side, writing a book, or writing an article or something. Yeah. There's a lot that you want to accomplish in a very limited space in order to make that goal happen.
Mm-hmm. And it is a very fascinating topic. Again, as you said, it's one that impacts, I think, anyone and just about any creative endeavor. By the fact that, again, the beauty about the game industry is that you can literally make whatever you want. You want to make a first-person MMO city builder roguelike, you can do that. But as you said, thinking about something and doing something are two vastly different things. And I think when it comes to this blank slate, I think there's two main points. As you said, with your point, or with your side of things, Rob, about, I want to do all this, but do I have the skill set needed to be able to put this crazy idea in play? And then the other idea is, what is my plan? Because, again, we can sit here and we can pretty much spend like 3 hours describing game ideas until everybody watching chat probably falls asleep at their keyboard. But thinking about this stuff and then actually saying, okay, now how does all this even work to begin with? How do I even start this? Are just two vastly different elements, and it is very hard to get things going like that. I know for myself, I always have trouble when I'm starting to write a post or even with the book in terms of, what am I going to say? Like, for me, it's always been, I can think of, like, the ending, where I want to go, but getting there is another matter entirely. And when it comes to game design, it's very hard because you never know how your idea is going to develop from beginning to end. We've seen it many times over. You start an idea and realize, maybe that idea sucks. Let me try something else. Oh, maybe this idea sucks. Let me try again. And it just gets to that point of what was even my original goal to begin with.
Yeah, and even kind of towards the opposite. Like even if it's good, one idea inspires another, inspires another, inspires another, and suddenly your direction, which was headed to the left, is now headed to the right, and is vastly larger. And per what Animuter is saying, like I'm exactly in that boat. And one of the things I like to do is like, well, I want to simplify my medium. So I mean, I know again with simulations, like I want to do this. I am good with spreadsheets. I'm going to try it in Excel, and I have the skills to do it in Excel. I've done it before. But then you're like, well, no one plays games in Excel. It would just be me. Well, what if it's just a design document that I can pass it off to a programmer and pay them to do it? Well, sure. But then what if I wanted to do it all on my own? Well, what if we tried a board game, which is another medium I really like, and I've designed board games, and it's much easy. I mean, it's not easier to design a board game by any stretch. I don't want to add that, but it's easier for someone without programming knowledge to put together like a physical thing. The production part of it is another matter and super complicated, but at least I can get to that point and then worry about production at that point.
Mm-hmm.
And same with writing. Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, and like almost every developer has said just how great paper prototyping is when it comes to building it, even just like testing an idea. Now, it doesn't work for every game, but as you said, like if your game can kind of work in that medium, it is certainly an option.
Yeah, if you have a turn-based game, the paper prototyping is amazing. For an actual board game, you really have to simplify the concept and really abstract it. And one of the things that I thought of at the same time was, well, you could also do a tabletop RPG. A simulation game works perfectly with that medium because that's all Dungeons and Dragons is. It's a giant spreadsheet, and the randomizer is dice. So, and the story is told verbally. So you can basically do anything you want. You just have this rule set you abide by, and everyone agrees to. So you could totally do a sim game using a book and a set of rules with the randomizer in your hand, and paper to keep track of your goals and your progress. Making an actual board game is it's so much abstraction, but you can go that other route. And so writing a book and writing it is just basically just writing a giant GDD. And that's, once I realized I could do that, that allowed me to go a lot further. Then I get that part where one idea inspires another, and then it's just out of control. And reining it in as it's hard to take my own advice because the advice is have willpower, get that one core idea and just follow it through to the end, and you can go from there. It'll be done, and then you can branch off and edit it and kind of go through and polish it in the way you want. And so I have to follow my own advice. It's just the difficulty in doing so is just super hard for someone with the mentality that I have. I know a lot of people are very good at that. Mm-hmm. My skill is more in telling other people, and that is legitimately a skill that helps. I'm very much a coach and a team player over a solo artist, but I like to give it a shot.
Yep.
But that's a good point, Animuter. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to step over you, Josh, but that's a good tool to bring up. I don't know if anyone knows about it. Go ahead and Google it. It's an interesting way to take notes and flesh out an idea.
Mm-hmm. Yep, and you always run into that risk, as you said, with like trying to build these ideas. Like, what happens if you think of something else and you get really excited about that? Do you keep with the original idea? Do you focus on the new one? And like we've seen many like first timers and students run into that issue of, oh, I got this great idea, I'm going to build it, but oh, I got another idea, let me go move that one. That one's so much better. Oh, but now I have another idea, let me do that one. And it just repeats, and nothing ever gets done. And
that's. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I was going to say, and then there's always that other side of, what if that next idea is the idea? What if this is going to be the one that makes me famous, and I make millions of dollars off it, but I never do it because I'm stuck on this one?
Yeah, it's a curse that both my wife and I have. She's a writer, a novel writer, and so and especially making a game, the time commitment that comes with it, and so coming up with one idea and having two ideas, you have to you feel like you have to decide, and you have to make one just back burner and the other one is your focus, and you want to pick one that you're going to be good focusing on for years possibly. And that is a chore. That is something that's very difficult to focus on if you're someone who's as easily distracted as I am.
Mm-hmm. And again, like, the investment, as you just said, is such a very big part of that. Like, the same with my book. Like, this is a good 3 months of work on top of, working with the editor, probably for another 2 to 3 months. Like, that's a lot of time, or at least a lot of time for a book. Video games, again, can take, 6 to 12 months, even several years to make, and you don't know how that's going to end up. Again, we have many people on the Discord channel come to the streams here who've said that I've spent like 2+ years on a game and it barely sold. And that can happen. And it's why a lot of people say to try to focus on doing things part-time. But getting back to the main topic about dealing with this blank slate, that it's always hard to know, what exactly are you trying to aim for? Because as you said, like, you can sit here and come up with an idea, but that idea can radically change over how many iterations you have. And there's always that push, and this is the other point I'll throw to you, like, there's always that allure of, again, going big. This is my dream idea. Why shouldn't I spend 6 years on it and, go from a simple 2D text adventure to fully 3D Unreal graphics? It's going. If I spend 3 times more work on it, it means I'll make 3 times more profit. As we all know, never really happens.
Yeah, no, that's exactly the case. And yes, the blank slate problem is a problem for a lot of developers, because there's a lot of things at play. I think the 2 biggest things at play are: do you want to make money off of this? Do you want to make a living off of this? If you do, well, you have suddenly a lot less time and freedom to enjoy that, to quote, enjoy that blank slate problem. There's a certain point where you just got to put that pen on, and damn the ink that's going to set in there. You got to keep going and try and fix it later. Anything that comes up, any problems that come up. But yeah, you suddenly are under a deadline, and that deadline is how much money you have to afford rent.
Yep.
And that's a very real thing. So blank slate really can affect someone who is looking to get their next paycheck or even meal on the table.
Mm-hmm. And we spoke about this last week with the differences between being a hobbyist and somebody who does this professionally or full time. Because you said, if you're just doing things like, and we hear this from a lot of first timers and students about, I'm just going to make whatever I want. I'm just going to, throw crazy ideas out. If it takes me 2 weeks or 2 months, I don't care. I'm not intending to sell it. It's just going to be my own little crazy idea. It's like, okay, well, that's good. But how are you earning a paycheck over that? How are you going to apply that to a job? And like, long-time fans of mine know that I hate that phrase, just make video games. Like, that's all you need to do and everything else will work out. It doesn't really work that way unless you're actually building a structure, unless you're actually coming up with an actual strategy for how you're going to put this together. And again, that goes back to the issue with the blank slate, that if you can do anything you want, how do you settle on just one thing?
Yeah, settling on the one thing, it feels like that's a bad word, right? Mm-hmm. You've settled for it. It's kind of the back burner thing. It isn't what you wanted to do, and you can really kick yourself for that. I think a lot of people think that they're going to regret, not making their dream title, because if you made it the way you want, yes, it would sell 1 million copies. Everyone knows that their dream project is the best that will ever happen in the world. Mm-hmm. But no one knows how to make a dream project. I don't think anyone's fulfilled their fantasy of the game they wanted to make. It's possible someone has, managed to nail that down, but I guarantee you that person probably didn't make $1 million off of it. Yeah. And that's a problem there with the reality versus what your dreams are. Oh gosh, I had a thought and lost it. But one of the things that also kind of hinders me is I grew up enjoying writing more than anything. And the thing I got really good at was flash fiction and very short stories, which I would write just from scratch into something that meant something, and then go back and just kind of edit it. And it would take me, for a really good like idea, it might take me a month to like fully edit the way I wanted it to be done. I can't work like that for video game. You just can't, because there's so much more than just coming up with a story and a plot, or even a design concept. Like at a certain point, you got to worry about assets. Well, when do you worry about assets? Do you worry about it super early, or do you worry about it after the fact, after you've laid out some stuff, after you started coding? Like even using a tool like RPG Maker, you look at that and you're like, okay, well, I have a cool RPG story I want to make. I'll just use the assets that are there. And then you suddenly run into a limitation somewhere along the line where you want an asset that they don't have. So now you have to make it. And how do you make it in the style that's already there? How do you make it match everything? Well, okay, well, now I've got to make other things match. And it's a snowball, and that snowball will kill you. And it is at a certain point, you have to say something like, well, if I'm just using the assets that are with the game and I want to finish a game, I've got to not make assets. I've got to use what's there and use it creatively. So yeah, you put yourself under those constraints, and you either have to follow through with those constraints or recognize that you have to be flexible on those constraints and go from there.
Yeah. And yeah, that's another really good point. Again, about the dangers of a blank slate, is that you know the full extent of this project. It's different from, if I'm building if I'm building a shed for my backyard, I know what that end is. It's going to be a shed. Yeah. I buy the wood, I buy the paint, I buy the nails, do it all. If it looks like a shed, I'm done. That's about it. But with a video game, it doesn't work like that. Again, the idea and the actual finished product are two vastly different things. You can say, what if I'm going to make this game procedurally generated, but what if I don't know how to do a procedural algorithm? Well, I have to look one up, I have to hire someone. As you said, what if I want this amazing looking character, but there's no asset in the Unity store that I can use? Well, I either have to make it, or I have to hire someone to make it for me. Okay, well, what about music? What about additional graphics? What about if my game, if I do a play testing and people want something else? Do I add that in? Do I leave it alone? If I add it in, maybe that means more sales. If I don't, it means less work. And again, it just keeps going and going and going.
Yeah, and that is also the problem with the blank slate, is that if you're someone like me, who's seen projects start to finish many, many, many times, you know that at some point you're going to run into a problem, and that's what I brought up with the asset. It's like you're going to run into a problem that if you solve it, like you're going to have to go back and change a ton of things. And so to avoid that work, you try and solve every problem ahead of time. And that is an exercise in futility that I am pushing the stone up the hill, that I know that that's what's happening, but I can't stop it from happening. Like, it's an exercise in futility. You're like, okay, well, I've identified that problem ahead of time, and I have to go back and, like, in my head, just kind of remap everything. But you just know that once you start working, and it's happened to me before, like, okay, I finally have a plan. I'm going to start working, and then problem. And then you have to just recalculate everything. And knowing that that's going to happen is also just very, like, it's formidable.
Yep. And that's another big point. You don't know what the problems are going to come up when you're designing a game. And those things can kill a project. Again, what happens if your idea, you don't know how to program it? Like, what do you do then? Like, if I come up with this crazy puzzle design for a platformer, but I have no idea how to program it, there's no tutorials, do I leave it alone? Do I, try to put something together and maybe it won't work out as well? I don't know. And
well,
yep, go ahead.
The problem that you might run into with that is that there is that option of hiring somebody, right? But what if you hire, like, you don't know programming, or you don't know it well enough, so you hire a programmer and they tell you, no, this can't be done, or this can't be done in this language,
or exactly,
or this is going to take like way longer than you're expecting. You run into that problem, and how do you handle that? Like, again, you go back to the drawing board, and again, this is something that when I'm looking at a blank slate, all of this is occurring to me, and it's overwhelming. So I know a lot of people can just plow ahead and they'll figure out the answers when they get there, but you run into that problem, and you're going to have someone, if you're hiring, tell you that something can't be done, or it's going to take longer than you think. And you have to figure out that's why you make a visual novel and say, it's all right. Hey, I'm on board with that, Mike. That's where I have to be like, okay, well, I'm just going to do a tabletop version of the game and make it a book instead of an actual interactive computer title.
Yep, and as you said earlier, when you're trying to think of all the possible things that can go wrong, you don't know everything that's going to go wrong with an idea. Because again, if you're dealing with a blank slate, what is your endpoint? We talked about this last week with how do you know when a game is finished kind of thing. Again, it's that same issue that you could keep working on a game for the next 15, 20 years if you want, but there is no way in hell you are making a profit on that. I mean, there's just no way. Like, people again will point to something like Dwarf Fortress and how they're working on a game probably until like the year 2030, or until the developer just finally goes mad and gives up on it. But they are not bringing in millions of dollars with Dwarf Fortress. I don't care, how many people watching this love that game. I don't care how celebrated it is. That game is not making massive profit. And again, that is perfectly fair. Not every game is going to make that. As you said earlier, if you're making your dream game, the one that's for you and maybe a few of your friends, you can't turn around and say, oh, but I'm sure this will sell Fortnite numbers. It's not happening.
Right. Well, and the fact that technology changes over time. So that is another limiting factor. And I feel like one of the big points that I've been trying to allude to is that when I look at a blank slate, and again, a lot of people have this problem, you don't just see the game you're trying to make. You see all the problems that come. And those are like walls inhibiting any work from getting done. And again, if you're trying to make a living off of this, and I advise anyone who thinks that Dwarf Fortress is like their business model is successful, I advise you to never do that, because one company that I'm aware of has made that work, and that's the people who made Dwarf Fortress. So, and I can't remember the company name all of a sudden, but why is it? It's still eluding me. But yeah, you have to give yourself a timeline, and if you want to make money, you have to do that as a hobbyist, which is what I basically am, making a game, or making this game. Like, I have that flexibility, and I don't have anything pressing on me to do this. It's just something I want to try and do. But yeah, for someone who's like, okay, well, I'm going to make money with this, I'm going to leave my job and do this. Yeah, that's rough. And then you hit that reality of that blank wall that you have to fill with work, and it's superimposing, and it can be crippling.
Yeah, and that's the same thing. It's that whole idea of you're defeated before you even get started kind of mentality that I'm going to do this, and this, but wait, I need money, I need resources. But how am I going to get all that? Well, I might as well just give up now before I even start trying. And it's very hard to approach these things, as you said earlier, about when you're working at a major company. I think it's almost like kind of akin to being back in school. That when you're in school, you have somebody telling you what to do. I want you to write a 200-page essay on 18th century Britain. That's your constraint. You can't write 500 pages about your favorite TV show. And that structure is good for a lot of people, being told that what you can and can't do. But the problem, of course, when you're in a creative industry is that you don't have somebody telling you what you can or can't do. Unless, of course, again, you're working at a publisher. The publisher says, I want a match 3 game about, Game of Thrones. You're making a match 3 game based on Game of Thrones. Like, that's it.
Yeah.
And we see, and it's very interesting, like, we hear this from a lot of indie developers who, they will take those, like, structure or those contract work, and then they'll use that, kind of funnel that money into their dream project or to their side project. And it's kind of like them trying, I guess in a way, having their cake and eat it too. On one side, I'm working on this very structured and limited design, and then in my spare time, it's, free expression, I'm an artist at the moment. I can do whatever the hell I want. But again, like, I think it's very interesting. And you already talked about this, Rob, but for the people watching us live or recorded, what kind of mentality do you have? Like, are you comfortable with working without constraints? Or do you need something to say you can't do this? Or you can do that? And it's not easy answer to, or it's not an easy question to answer there. Because again, like, I can sit here and talk about writing stuff, but talking about and doing it are two different things. And it's never really, I think, something that you stop learning. I think that's a big point about having this kind of freedom. I mean, even like established developers I've spoken to have that problem of knowing, what the hell do I make next?
Yeah. And I think to add to that, because it is a really good question to ask yourself and ponder, is it's also a hard answer to take.
Oh, yeah.
If that answer is no, I can't work without constraints, I think that we're all taught, and possibly especially in the United States, it could be a worldwide thing. I don't know, but I feel like we're all taught that we can do anything, and we are masters. Yeah, we're masters of our own domain. We can make our own futures, and I don't think a lot of us can, and that includes me. Mm-hmm. It's a hard reality to be like, you know what? I actually need this structure. I've tried the entrepreneur thing a couple of times, and you know what? I just thrive better in a situation where I have a team around me that I can work with and help out in my own special way. But if I try to make a project on my own, I freeze up and I have this blank slate problem. And so it's one of those things that you have to answer, and you have to answer honestly, or you just have to figure it out the hard way. And the hard way can be super damaging, but sometimes you just have to make that trip.
Yeah. I mean, when I was in college, I thought I was going to become this hotshot programmer who would design video games, left and right. I would be working at Nintendo by now. But yeah, like, I had to sit down and go, I can't learn this. Like, my brain does not work when it comes to coding games. And if you can't code games, you can't necessarily build a game on your own. And that was when I started thinking about, well, what else can I do about video games? And then the blog started, and then Game Wisdom started, and we're here today. But like you said, it is a bitter pill to swallow. And yep.
Sorry, go ahead.
Oh no, go ahead.
I was just going to say that I feel like you're that in that thing that says, well, no, I not only can I do it alone, but I almost can't do it the other way. Mm-hmm. Because you seem to thrive on being able to accomplish a lot of little things at once. I mean, you have your books, you have your blog, you have your podcast, you have your recorded videos and your interviews, and you do and of course you're speaking things like going to the high school, going to the libraries. Yeah. Like, that's a lot of things to accomplish on your own. Like, that's impossible for a lot of people to do, including myself. And so, but also knowing that working with a team in a structured environment isn't for you is a great thing to know, because once you get in that job and you're like, I can't do this, you feel stuck there. Just like if I'm going to quit my job and work on games on my own, you're stuck. Like, you either have to spend all your time looking for another job, or you got to spend all your time working on something. And that is just so tough to grapple with.
Oh yeah. And a lot of people don't ask that question of themselves. You're trying to fit a square peg into a round hole kind of thing. And it is very tough when it comes to, what you want to do with, whether it's your livelihood or your job, or even just something you want to do creatively. And like you said a few minutes ago, it's definitely taught here in the United States, again, that you can do whatever you want, the world is yours. We even see it so much in, fiction and storytelling these days that, you're the chosen one. You can do it, it's not your problem that this isn't working, it's everybody else's. They don't see your vision. And we hear that a lot from first-time developers and people going, it's not my fault my game isn't selling. People just don't get my idea. or I'm going to make the best idea. What, you have a problem with that? Well, obviously you don't know what you're talking about. I built this, by hand for 7 years. I know exactly how this game works.
Yeah. Yeah, no, absolutely, that's the case. And I just want to comment on Mike's thing. If you can learn to read and write, you can learn to code. And I believe that 100%. And I believe coding should be taught to kids at a young age these days because it's incredibly useful and whatnot. But it is a difficult thing to pick up on your own after having, not done it. Mostly because it's a very different thing to learn. It is a language, as people know. And it takes some time, it does take some time to learn, and especially if you want to learn to do it in a way that allows you to build a game from scratch. Lord knows how many times I've tried to tackle Python or try to tackle a lot of scripting, because scripting is very doable. Like there's times where I just learn scripting based on either the job I have to do or whatever, and I don't consider it coding, but it very much is. It's not hardcore coding, but it is. It's logic based. You have to follow rules, or else it's not going to work. So there's a lot of people who code just without really knowing that it's coding or consider it that. But it is. It does require time, and that time that you're wasting, you kind of feel like, well, I could be making my game instead of learning this coding thing, when the two might not be easily removed from one another.
Yeah. And again, you don't know at the start of your project just what exactly all that is going to entail. Yeah. And that's true as well, Animator, that there aren't unified game design rules. I'm trying to make them. That's the point of the books. But again, there's nothing that's... And it's the same thing. Like, this is a great comparison. Again, game design has no rules to it. If you want to make your platformer and also have a real-time strategy element and also have stealth, you can do all that. Like, this is, I think, this will be, I think, at least for me, my final point for this, and I'll throw it to you, that when it comes to this blank slate from a game design perspective, you can make whatever the hell you want. Again, that's why so many indie developers are doing it these days. You want to sit in your house and design your dream game for 5 to 10 years, nobody's going to come in and say, you can't have that in your game, that's not allowed. But again, when it comes to this blank slate, in a game design point of view, you have to start setting some kind of foundation for your title. So we've talked about before with the core gameplay loop. There's got to be something in your game that kind of binds the entire experience together. Is it a 2D platformer? Is it a rhythm-based game? Or are you making a cooking simulator? I just recently finally got a chance to sit and play Project Hospital, which is a hospital management game. But you need structure. Even if it's just a very loose structure, you still need something to, kind of like, what's that expression about, like the North Star will guide you home, like from sailing. You need something to focus your attention on. Or as you said, you're going to run into the situation of, I'm just going to put this into my game, and it's going to be just this unmanageable mess. I have no idea how to code it. I have no idea how to build it. And, it's just like this mess of ideas.
Yeah. And I think to put a cap on it on my end, it's that blank slate is something that is difficult to tame. And you really, before you get to that blank slate, you should really know what your limitations are. I feel like staring into that void, you learn a lot about yourself, and you just have to be willing to listen and understand what it is you're trying to do and who you are and how you can go about doing it. If you have a goal of needing to make your own game, well, you got to figure out how to fit yourself into that particular realm, because it's its own world. And if you're there and it doesn't match, and you're trying to fit your personality into a very specific thing you imagine, how it's supposed to work, and it doesn't work with you, that's not gonna wind up good for anybody. So know who you are, learn who you are, and if the blank slate that you have to tackle is not who you are, then, or you need some other kind of structure to help you make it, well, that's what you should focus on.
Yeah. When you stare into the abyss stares back, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And this is why I think a lot of developers have said that it's important to do, you can test multiple ideas. Nothing is stopping you from kind of with a 5-minute prototype on an idea. But you have to start to settle on what you want to do. Like as you said earlier, Rob, like you have to. No developer in the world, especially an independent developer, is going to get 100% what they want in a game, unless they are that mythical master programmer, designer, artist, composer, playtester, all in one.
Yeah.
So you have to understand, as you said, like where do you fit in? Are you a team player? Are you that person who you can't do anything on your own, but you can certainly get 5 to 10 other people to work on a unified idea? Are you that person who's a great programmer, but you can't think of interesting gameplay to save your life? Again, as we said earlier, you have to ask these questions. As Mike just said in chat, yep, knowing your own personal limitations is a good point. When I try to work with a few local people around here, there was one guy who, he was just very hard to work with. He was, again, one of those people who wants it done his way. He's always worked alone. And if you don't do it his way, he just shuts down. Because, if it's not his idea, who cares? That kind of thing. And you can work like that. Again, the beauty about the blank slate about game design is if you want to be in your house for 5 to 10 years and work on a game by yourself, as long as you got money coming in, you're paying your mortgage on time, you can do that.
Oh, and you can tell other people to do stuff for you, but you got to pay them too.
Yep. But at the end of the day, though, if you want to make something like actually see a project through to completion, you need to know what you can and can't do. Like we've said before, this is an important point about playtesting. You can sit and design a game, but you don't know how people are going to respond to it. I remember the Shovel Knight Yacht Club. They were talking about a friend of theirs who was trying to build a game, and he was just constantly yelling at people and taking the control from their hands, saying, "You don't get what this is. Let me show you." And it's like, yeah, that is not going to work. That game is not going to do well no matter what happens. And like you said, if you don't know something, sometimes you have to bite the bullet and find somebody who can help you. And I think that's another thing we're kind of trained. I know some of my family members hate to ask for help or hate to ask for directions. For me, I'm fine with that. If I'm not sure of someone I want some help, I'm going to ask people. I do this all the time on Discord. I've asked you for advice. I've asked other Josh. I am perfectly fine with admitting that I don't know something. And it is very important to understand that sometimes it's about being able to find the information or find the know-how than just you being able to do everything yourself. Because there are some people, Amu just mentioned Lucas Pope, he's the one who did Return of the Obra Dinn and a few of those other games. There are people out there who can do everything on their own. But you can't, I think, be something you're not. I think that's kind of our ultimate point here. That if you're not a programmer, if you just do not have it at all, forcing yourself to learn programming for 5 years while trying to build your own game at the same time is just going to end in disaster. And it would be quicker for you to just find somebody who can do that for you, or someone who can do art. But then, as you just said a few minutes ago, Rob, you got to pay somebody. Nobody's going to work on your dream project for free.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes you just have to learn to make those considerations or settle on certain points. Accept the things you cannot change.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I think that's a great spot to end that on.
All right. Yeah, we got very philosophical there at the end.